In 3, 2, 1. I'm just kidding.
I was ready to go.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Hello and welcome to The Pouch, the crumb-filled toaster of podcasts that helps the average Aussie try and make sense of their current political environment. I'm Gregg. I think I can hear my neighbours chewing their food. Savage.
And I'm Jake. I've got bonds and I'm not afraid to use it. Or them. Far Wharton. On today's episode, we talk Angus beef, Chinese duck, and a side of grasslands.
Sounds like a delicious episode, Jake. And can't wait to digest it. And Jake, while we are snug as a bug in the proverbial rug, I want to know about how we're going to pay all this money back, man. Like, we got all this money that we've given out to all of these people. People are getting $1,500 a fortnight. They're getting, $10,000 from their super. I don't know if we pay that one back. How do we go about paying all of this money back? Where does it come from? And are the aliens going to get cranky at us?
Spoiler alert, have your wallet ready.
I'm worried people are going to think that I'm faking that laugh every time we do the episode, but you really do come up with those on the spot. They do genuinely make me laugh. They're really quite funny. Jake, we've had a big week in politics.
We have.
Yes. So, Jake, Eden-Monaro MP Mike Kelly is...
Mike Kelly, that's it?
Yes, I know, Jake. Thank you very much. Eden-Monaro MP John Kelly is resigning. Mike Kelly is resigning and is forcing a by-election. This is exciting for us, being a politically based podcast.
Yep.
What's a by-election?
A by-election is when it's essentially an election between a normal election cycle. So it's sort of like an interlude. It's where where somebody who has already been elected either forfeits their position because they're unable to fulfill their duties, or they give it up, essentially. Okay. So it means that they have removed themselves from the seat, and as a consequence, it forces an interlude type election.
Right, because someone's got to run it, right? Someone's got to be there.
Exactly.
Now, this one's particularly interesting because they're talking about a 3-horse race, which I presume means Far Lap, the other one, and
I'm not a big horse guy. Flipper.
Well, neither am I. I could name one, and then I went to a dolphin. You know me.
I like horses. I love horses.
I only fire up a sports bet account for by-elections.
Yeah.
So there's a 3-horse race, which I presume is Liberal, National, Labor.
It could be a number of things. There could also be an independent. I have heard that John Barilaro was running as well. He's a national, but I think he's in the state. He's in New South Wales state, and he might be going for that. He's a really popular dude. He used to run one of the major what do you call it? Mortgage firms,
crime syndicates. Oh,
no, he used to run one of the major mortgage companies, and was very popular on TV, etc. But it'll be really interesting. It's most likely Liberal, Labor, and Nationals, but could just as easily be an independent, because those country seats often have former Nationals MPs or former Liberal MPs that just didn't agree with the direction of the party and became an independent.
Yeah, look, and I've heard a lot of commentary around this, and the fact that that because it is a by-election, by-elections enormously favour the incumbent. So at the moment, it's a Labor-held seat, but it
has been for about a century from memory.
Right,
from memory.
That's a long time.
Yeah. 100 years.
That's a tough race. I might throw my hat in the ring just for a bit of fun.
Why not?
Yeah. So New South Wales, Deputy Premier and Nationals MP John Barilaro is understood to be interested in the seat.
Yes.
So we know that Mike Kelly is resigning due to health concerns. He saw Eden-Monaro through the bushfire crisis. We wish him all the best, and obviously we'll keep an eye on this particular Eden-Monaro seat, considering how impacted it was by the fires as well. Obviously, the news is kind of changed to whatever random thing is happening now. But yeah, like it's all sort of shifted gears from the bushfires, and so the focus is off the sort of rebuilding, and it will be interesting to see how the constituents of Eden-Monaro or how the people of Eden-Monaro respond to the by-election.
Often when you hold a by-election, and I mean,
often when I do, and I'm holding one right now.
Right now isn't fair because we are going through a national crisis, and therefore there's a lot of, I think, support for the Prime Minister, even in areas where they may not have been previously, particularly in a fire-ravaged area, considering the Prime Minister's response to the bushfires after he returned from holidays. So normally when there is a by-election held, there would normally be that discussion of, is this a referendum of how the government is doing at the moment, and therefore is it going to swing one way or another, or is it going to be held? As you say, by-elections often favour the incumbent, so the person who currently holds that seat. But, that's interesting because that's Labor right now, and there is invariably, because of the coronavirus and the action that has been taken by the Liberal National Party and the Prime Minister, and the level of cohesion that he's been able to foster amongst his political colleagues, maybe it will be a referendum towards the Liberals. But again, it's a very safely held seat, a blue ribbon seat, if you will, for the last 100 years. Nice. So we'll just have to see.
All right, absolutely. Now, the next story that we've got is about Angus Taylor, right? Now, part of our job here at The Pouch is to try and scour the internet late at night for stories that don't have the word coronavirus in them. And sometimes in the depth of the darkest corners of the internet, out pop these stories. This is one of those stories.
Yes.
Angus Taylor. We've got police couldn't prove Angus Taylor's office downloaded document.
Yes.
Which document?
Well, so this all comes back to, and we actually
which document, Jake? Answer the question.
Good question. It's a great question. It's an annual report, Greg. It's an annual report. So it's
less exciting than one, I hope.
We did actually discuss this a while ago, but we got some new news in this case. So essentially, it stems from the strange case of a fair amount of enmity or antipathy between the energy and emissions reductions minister in the federal side, Angus Taylor, and the mayor of Sydney, Clover Moore. So Angus Taylor, I think it was late 2018, maybe early 2019, had sent a letter to the Mayor of Sydney, Clover Moore, which he also, conveniently sent to the Daily Telegraph, a major newspaper in New South Wales, where he berated the Mayor, who has always been a climate change activist, and he's constantly calling out the federal government, particularly Angus Taylor, given his portfolio, on the government's inaction or lack of action or, perceived inaction on climate change. And Taylor alleged that the council's own annual report said that they had spent $15 million on air travel, and thus the mayor should not be lecturing anyone on climate change when her own council is emitting so much through air travel. Well, it turns out that the annual report that was provided to prove the accusations was found to be completely doctored, and the actual amount spent on travel was something like $5,000 odd. So the New South Wales Police this week found that there is no evidence that the doctored version of the annual report showing that $15 million on travel did not come from the council's website, as Angus Taylor has been repeatedly claiming. And to add a little bit of salt to the wound, opposition leader Anthony Albanese said that Angus Taylor, quote, must come clean on where the document his office used to attack City of Sydney Lord Mayor Clover Moore came from. Quote, he should just say where it came from. This is quite frankly absurd that this has gone on for so long. And he furthered this. He said, quote, and if he won't do it, the Prime Minister must make him come clean to Parliament. Lying to Parliament is a very serious offence, and we can't have a circumstance whereby it is just swept away like it didn't happen.
Well, that's a reasonable thing to ask, isn't it? I mean, I think if you're using doctored documents, or at least claiming that they come from one particular place when they don't, I think that that's a fair reason to try and get to the bottom of this. What does Angus Taylor have to hide?
Well, on the one hand, he may be protecting, say, a senior staffer who was sent something from, within the office or within the Prime Minister's office, for example, that might have been slightly doctored. I'm speculating, but like it might have come from somewhere internally within the sort of the machinery of government, and Angus Taylor might be protecting somebody from within the government. But equally, this would all go away if he said, "I did it."
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Or Bob over there.
He doesn't
Say hi,
seem
Bob.
like the type of character who does that though.
No, he likes to fight.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because it's just sincerely hurting him. I suppose if he goes back on everything that he's said, like on the public record now, it is super murky and really wonky. But ultimately, this thing is only going to keep on going.
Yeah, and you know what? Like maybe to admit defeat now is not such a bad thing because, I mean, there's a whole bunch of other news out there, so it might get swept under the rug. But at the same time, you know, we do have MPs getting or losing their jobs or resigning for a lot less. And MPs who have kept their jobs for a lot more. Yeah, so
too true.
There is that. All right. Well, we'll wait and see how that one plays out. There's a few different news outlets that have tackled that one. The Sydney Morning Herald. We got some of that information from, and also the Guardian as well. Now, Jake, this is a big one. We recently just got off a phone call with our friend Pete Smisson, who runs a.
I'm smitten with Pete Smisson.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely another podcast that he should run. Gosh, we're good at this marketing thing.
Yeah,
for everyone but ourselves. He's and we were on his podcast. We would talk. His podcast focuses on Australianisms and their definition for a sort of a global audience, a non-English speaking audience, or an audience who's recently learning how to speak English and maybe coming to Australia. We spoke about some political words, and then he threw a bit of a curveball at me and said one of his listeners wanted to know what was happening between Australia and China at the moment.
Yeah. So, Greg, what is happening between Australia and China at the moment?
That's a good question. I mean, there's not a lot of flights. I'll give you that.
True. That is so true.
There's a lot fewer flights than what there were before.
Yep. Technically accurate.
We are the gum stuck to the shoe of China.
Yes.
That is the story according to state media in coronavirus investigations stoush. Gosh, I do love a good stoush.
I do too. Not so much between states that could crush us with a mere look at in our direction.
What's your favorite stoush of all time?
The one
aside from Brad and Jennifer.
I was never at all. I'm more into the Kardashians.
No.
Is that how you say it?
I was just killing time while you gathered your thoughts. That's what good friends do. That's what good comedic friends do.
I appreciate it. Look, I don't know. To be frank, I don't. I've
Cold War.
Yes, America and Russia. Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, politically in Australia, it's hard to go past the ousting of Gough Whitlam.
Julia Gillard.
Gough Whitlam.
Tony Abbott.
All those years ago when the Governor General essentially overturned what was otherwise a functioning Parliament that had been voted in by the people of Australia in favour of the opposition leader, who then ran a minority government until the time that an election could be held. Who won after that? Yeah, that was a stoush and a half.
That is a
Governor
stoush.
General versus Gough Whitlam. That's unlikely to make it to the podcast.
I don't think so. I think we've got a whole episode. I think like we've got a whole other episode that we can do.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah,
but
stoushes, a great Australian stoushes. Anyway,
big
news.
basically done.
China hates Australia.
Yes. Australia has been described as, quote, gum stuck to the bottom of China's shoe by a Chinese state media. That's very evocative terminology.
Reasonable. It is. It makes me feel small and squishy.
Yes. Also under the shoe of China, which is not a great position to be in, although many would argue that we're probably already there politically, economically, and otherwise. But yes, Australia has emerged as one of the most vocal critics of Beijing as it calls for investigation of the origins and spread of the virus, which emerged in China late last year and has now killed over 200,000 or 300,000 people around the world.
Define vocal, like one of the most vocal critics. Like how vocal have we been?
So on the international stage, we're one of a scant few group of countries who have agreed with Donald Trump in the calls for investigating where the virus originated, so that we can essentially lay blame on China. And, Trump has gone as far as to say, hey, we could sue them down the track. We can sue them because they did it. They caused this. But this is the thing, and we discussed this on the Aussie English podcast. The fact is, it is not a bad thing that we ask for China or ask for an independent arbiter like the World Health Organization to perform an inquiry onto how we got to the release of a pandemic across the world. That's not a bad thing, because it could give us insight into how the thing actually worked, how it spread, etc., how it became such a prolifically spreading virus. But secondly, it can give us some idea of how to plan and how to act into the future if another virus, and it's probably inevitable, if another virus pops up and starts gaining a foothold within any individual region, wherever that region might be.
Yeah.
What Australia didn't do was say, hey, we want to learn from this. We want to make sure that we as a world, as a global society, learns from what occurred, and we want to understand what steps were taken. Could have they been done better, so that we can know how to act in the future? Right? It's essentially gathering the collective wisdom and ensuring that we use that wisdom into the future to improve our actions, etc. It's that old saying from Newton: "If I succeeded today, it is because I stood on the shoulders of giants." Which is a great, that is how we should aspire to be as a society. Learn from the people that came before us. Learn from the wisdom of the ages. But that's not how we went about it. Instead, we said, Trump's right. You guys, you did it. We want to know how it happened in your country so that we can point the blame and say you did it. Which is, it's inappropriate, it's not useful, and ultimately it's gotten us to the situation that we're in today, which is essentially China saying, do we really need to buy beef from Australia? Like, they're being super rude to us, guys. Do we really need to buy the scant few things that Australia makes that we want to buy? We could just cripple them. It's just, we could have gone about this in an appropriate and strategic way that would have seen us together acting as a global citizen, as a member of a global citizenry that wants to never see this happen again.
But what do you do in this situation, right? Like, what's your take on, we depend on China so much. We know that they're evil. We know that they do terrible things to journalists. We know that they ban everything from Animal Crossing. They banned Animal Crossing recently because people were, getting together and protesting about Hong Kong in Animal Crossing. Like, you can't, I don't know.
Oh, that's that game.
Yeah.
That's the
it's
game.
Like a video
Animal
game.
Crossing.
So China banned it, right? So we know that they do these terribly evil things. Why can't we just stand up to them for once and just deal with whatever consequence? Is it going to be that dire? Do people die in Australia if we don't? If we stick up to them too much? If we stand up to them too much?
No. The short answer is they hold all the power, so they can act however they feel appropriate. Invariably, if they piss off everyone, they won't have customers. And they may also find themselves on the very sharp and pointy end of sanctions that would see them unable to import stuff as well. but in saying that, China is massive. The fact is they don't necessarily have to get all of their iron ore and precious metals from Australia and coal from Australia, because they have the Mongolian desert, like the autonomous Mongolian region, which is full of the stuff. But they go to us because we're an equitable trading partner with them. So could we stand up to them? Absolutely. Should we stand up to them? Absolutely. But is there a way to get the outcome that you want, i.e. understand what has gone on here, at the same time as achieving a positive, is there a way to achieve a positive outcome from this at the same time as being strategically expedient? Absolutely. And it was not It was not the way that we went about it.
All right, so maybe a little too much too soon.
Mate, I just think they just went about it in a really silly way. Like, there was a couple of uppity LNP spokespeople who essentially said, "Yeah, what Trump said." Right.
Do we know who they were? Can we write them? Can we write them an email?
Strongly worded. Yeah.
Worded email.
You can expect it'll be a Barnaby Joyce. No, I don't know off the top of my head.
All right. Some fringe person who doesn't deserve to be mentioned on the pouch.
Yeah, Captain Fringy.
Now, Jake, I've taught in a few different schools and I've taught in a few different places. Most of my teaching career has been done in Queensland, and I was lucky enough to teach in a small rural town called Biloela. And now Biloela did get on the map a couple of times for some flooding, which wasn't exciting at the time, but it was nice to see Biloela on the news. And now we're back on the news, and we've been back on they are back on the news, and they've been back on the news for a little while. They had a KFC when I was there. I presume it's still there. Big sponsor of the show.
Yep, KFC.
Yeah. They're back in the news, right? Because there's a family, they're known as the Tamil family, I think. Is that, like a Tamil family?
Yeah.
They're in Biloela in Queensland, in your home state. And the federal government has been ordered to pay more than $200,000 in their legal fees. Is that right?
Yeah, so this is an interesting case of this Sri Lankan family who came to Australia as refugees. Essentially, they claimed asylum seeker status, and they ended up having two children who should have been counted as Australian citizens because they were born in Australia. A couple of years ago, their legal refugee status was challenged by the immigration minister or by the Department of Immigration, and then there became this protracted legal battle to decide on what to do with these essentially this family of half Australian citizens and half not Australian citizens, and the decision was made to eject them from the country. Actually. Last May, there was a case where essentially they were put on a plane to be sent back to Sri Lanka. And there was a last-minute injunction while the plane was in air, while the plane was in the sky, in the air, and
not in the town. Yeah,
and it ended up. They ended up diverting the family to Christmas Island, where they have been ever since. The legal injunction was essentially to say that the legal challenge by their Australian-born daughters had not been appropriately considered in the case to deport the whole family to Sri Lanka. The issue behind this is essentially they are the Tamil cultural group. So they are part of the Tamil cultural group within Sri Lanka, and the Tamils are a persecuted group within Sri Lanka, and as a consequence, if they were to go back, they would find themselves in a sticky situation, to say it very mildly. But there has been this legal challenge, and there's been a court bid to essentially charge the Australian taxpayer $200,000 in court fees that the family has paid. So these are essentially paying the family's costs in order to essentially have that have the proper immigration case resat and revisited.
Okay. All right. Well, that sounds like something we'll keep an eye on there as well. Best of luck to them and the whole family as well.
Yeah, I would say that the interesting thing with this particular case is this, Billawheeler is, vastly better than I do. I've only been there once, and it was a part of a whirlwind tour through rural and remote towns, and it's a very small community, and they're typical country community, very close knit, lovely people, and this group of this family essentially were ordered to live there, and they insinuated themselves into the community. The community was very accepting. There was a huge uproar from the community when the family was essentially removed in order to have their court case finished. So
not that I was living there, but I remember on the news. Yeah,
but yeah, it was massive. They seem to have garnered a lot of support. There was, lots of older ladies saying, "Hey, they used to call me Granny," and it was just they had clearly provided a value to that community, and same vice versa, and that's what we hope of our Australian citizens, and certainly they were doing that. It seems.
Look, I think that's the thing, right? It's not necessarily about the fact that, they can provide value, and then some people are charged with the very difficult task of having to sift through the legalness of it, despite the wants and needs of a community, or despite the wants and needs of the family, to try and figure out, what is the actual legal situation here. I mean, you can't just sort of, there are some people who can't just do things because they feel like it's the right thing to do. They have to make a real legal decision about what the legal thing to do is, not necessarily about what feels right.
Yeah, I think there has to be a balance, because ultimately, what is legally right is probably the thing that should be more heavily weighted, if you know what I mean, in that it is the thing, we set up all these legal precedences, we set up all these laws that are meant to tell us how to act in certain situations, and they should be based on, equity, that everyone gets the same access to the same things all of the time, and nobody is preferenced over anybody else. And I think that's what was done in terms of the legal challenge. However, there's the other side of that, which is, the compassionate side, and the fact that the kids had, set themselves up, that you don't necessarily want to rip them out of one community and put them into one that they've never had anything to do with. There's lots of angles to take this on, but there should be, I think there is a place for a fine balance between that, and that's, ultimately that's why we have the various high courts of the states and of our federal government, which is, they are there to interpret both the law as they see it and to inject their own judgment to some extent in there as well.
All right. So like I say, it'll be interesting to see the sort of the technicalities of that, and to see what the outcome is from those decisions of the court. Now, we did speak about Angus Taylor earlier, and he's back in the news already, Jake. It's been 10 minutes,
I know.
and he's back in the news.
He's a busy boy.
Angus beef without a side of grasslands. Jamland. It's exciting.
I know, right? There's so many mentions of food. I'm just so glad that I ate before we started recording. Yes. So
Jamland, the company part owned by Angus Taylor.
Yes, and his brother, in fact, Richard.
Richard.
It's classic. It's a classic Richard Taylor move, really, frankly.
It really is. It really is. I can't get enough of him.
But unfortunately, the brothers illegally poisoned critically endangered grasslands in the New South Wales Monaro region. Is
there a way to legally poison critically endangered grasslands?
Yeah, you ask for approval to do it.
So there's no legal way to poison critically endangered grasslands, though?
Oh, no.
Can I get a special permit for that, do you think?
I mean, possibly.
My point is, did they think that they had a permit?
Well, they were pretty sure that they didn't have a permit, and actually they were pretty sure that they didn't seek the appropriate approvals. But
Okay.
no, so the department, the Environment Department, has ordered the company to restore 103 hectares of native grassland, but Jamland, the company,
It's a job, isn't it?
It is, yes. They've avoided a fine and a criminal finding as well. So the decision comes 3.5 years after the company Jamland poisoned the grasslands on this property in Corrawong. Angus Taylor is one of the shareholders that's owned by his family. But earlier this week, Labor called for Scott Morrison to sack Taylor immediately after these multiple scandals, including obviously the one that we discussed earlier with the Lord Mayor of Sydney, Clover Moore. They're calling for Scott Morrison, quote, to finally show leadership on the integrity crises engulfing Mr. Taylor and sack him immediately.
For the grasslands?
Well, no, it's more like the multiple scandals, you might say,
right?
Involving Angus Taylor.
Yeah, he's mixed up in some stuff.
Well, the thing that complicates this as well is that the investigation actually took more than 3 years because Angus Taylor sought meetings with senior environment officials about the grasslands while it was underway, which, essentially he was seeking private information, publicly while it's an awkward way to describe it, but essentially he was doing a corrupt thing. He was seeking to benefit from his position as an MP. So the office of the then Environment Minister Josh Frydenberg, now the Treasurer, subsequently sought advice about whether laws protecting the grasslands could be changed. But we'll just have to see. We'll just have to see what happens.
Laws?
No. Well, actually, there is a note that I was going to cover it a couple of weeks ago, but I think it was a bit boring. But essentially,
we're doing grasslands. Let's talk about grass.
Why not? There is a push at the moment to overhaul federal environmental laws. There is an inquiry going on at the moment, but the former chair of the committee that would review the environmental laws, who is an environmental lawyer, went over to the bushfire relief effort, and as a consequence, that position of the chair and a chair with an environmental law degree and who's practiced environmental law is vacant. But there's the current.
You going to throw your hat in the ring?
No.
Why not?
I don't know anything about environmental law.
Wait, seems like you do.
I mean, I occasionally cut my own grass, but, isn't that what we all do?
Well, that's more qualified than me. More qualified than the person who's there at the moment.
I think we're equally qualified. But yes, we will just have to see about this one.
I only know one type of grass.
Nice.
Buffalo.
I know blue cooch.
Oh.
Sir Walter?
Wait, what did you call me?
Yeah,
anyway.
Frickin' blue cooch.
Speaking of Australianisms. Yep. Jake, while we are snug as a bug in the proverbial rug this week, I want to know, where are we getting all this money from?
Yeah.
All right. Well, where does the government money come from? I've heard about bonds, right?
We got it.
Bonds. So even Scott Morrison has said that they sold a lot of bonds.
They did.
And he was very chuffed about that.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So because at this stage we're at about $300 billion in stimulus measures, and several economists have been remarking that we'll probably be looking at around $500 billion by the time that we exit the full coronavirus shutdown. Not that we're talking about coronavirus today. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, where is that money coming from? So on level 3 of the Treasury building in Canberra's Parliament Triangle sits a group of people known as the Australian Office of Financial Management. Now, these
they were at my last party.
Yes, they were at mine too. They were the ones in the corner counting beans. They brought their own beans. Interesting people.
Then they borrowed a bunch of bits from other people. All right, carry on. Yes.
So yes, these people are the government's debt managers. Essentially, they act as the intermediaries between the government and its potential lenders. So every couple of days, depending on the requirements of the government, the government might say, "I need $100 billion," whatever it is. They set up online auctions for things called these government bonds, and the bonds,
Really? Like an auction?
An auction, like eBay,
Like eBay.
exactly like eBay. Or Gumtree. No, that's
Gumtree's not an
it's
auction.
not really.
No.
But essentially,
Big sponsor of the show.
yeah, exactly. The bonds are essentially government promises to repay borrowed money, much like the case of you going to Jerry Can Bank and saying, "I want money," and in return for the money, you promise to pay that back with interest.
Have I sort of got it right in the sense that rather than borrowing from Jerry Can Bank $130 billion, they sort of break that $130 billion up into little amounts?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, they do definitely break it up. Might be in $1 million lots, might be in $100 million lots. Essentially, whatever the amount of money that the government needs, they'll put out those types of things. But you got to think that if they put all of that money out at one time, then there is a real supply and demand issue there, in that you're supplying too much and you're potentially cutting back on your demand. Therefore, the value of the thing actually diminishes as well. So they have to balance out all that stuff as well.
Yeah, the value of the bond.
Yeah. Because the bond is a promise to pay back money, and if you flood the thing with money, the demand for that money might be lower because there's so much of it. I can get it anywhere.
I can't.
It's Keynesian economics
because I can't. It doesn't sound like that. It sounds like one of my daughter's stories, like a fairy story that I read to her before she goes to sleep or something.
It is basically magic money.
And they bought promises.
Well,
and they bought and sold promises, and the value of those promises went down because there were too many promises.
Well, that is actually Keynesian economics that you have just described.
It sounds like a Sammy J skit. There you go, Sammy J. You can keep that one.
I like it, but it is kind of like that because it's funny when the
it is funny
when the
it actually has a name too. Like people learn about this in university, do they?
Yeah. I mean, high school,
Keynesian economics.
Supply and demand. Yep.
Well, not the promises bit.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. That. No, you're entirely correct. Bonds are a more nuanced concept because it is wholly based on ethereal money because it's not.
And the king said that promises are more nuanced.
Yes, the emperor was wearing no clothes.
Okay,
but it is actually funny because
am I paying interest on this?
Well, we are collectively as a country. We are paying interest on everything. In actual fact, when the offers for bonds go out to the markets, essentially to people who bid on it. They don't actually say, "I will buy this." What they do is they offer an interest rate, and if that interest rate is accepted, then it's done. It's occurred. They have purchased that bond or that promise to pay back money.
Okay, hang on. I think I've got it right. So the bond is actually worth a particular amount.
Correct.
So So as the auctioneer, I say I have a beautiful bond here.
Yep.
It is valued at $10 million.
Yep.
What interest rate are you willing to bid on?
Yep.
To have this $10 million?
Yep.
So they bid down.
Well, the thing is, there's so few actual competing bids, if that makes sense. It's more
no
like
doubt.
I'm going,
Who the hell's bidding
I'll
on
take
this
this
stuff?
one, and then the next one comes up, and then they'll take that one. Because it is a perpetual cycle of these things.
What is the interest
circulating.
rate? Do we know?
Well, currently the cash rate is 0.5%? Is it 0.25%?
Yes.
So it'll be pretty close to that, or if not less. But essentially that.
So there's not like 2%.
No. It's always going to be very, very low. But interestingly enough,
is it always going to be in line with the
cash rate?
Yeah.
Not necessarily. It could be quite high because ultimately the percentage is set by the market, and the market could.
Is it variable?
It's probably fixed.
Okay.
I'm going to say probably. It's most likely
I'll let you
fixed.
finish your next sentence.
But so as of April, the Australian Office of Financial Management had 579.2 billion of these bonds on issue to investors, and we call essentially that level of debt Australia's gross debt. And our net debt is invariably much lower. But in order to fund the stimulus package, the Australian government will simply instruct the Australian Office of Financial Management to conduct more frequent and larger auctions of the bonds. And as a result, the level of outstanding government debt will go up, and so too will the total interest bill that must be paid out. Interestingly enough, Greg, the people that buy the bonds. It seems that over half are owned by non-residents, including foreign banks, central banks, and investors like big international superannuation and pension funds.
Yeah.
And the remainder is held, although it's admittedly under 50%, the remainder is held by Australian entities, including banks, super funds, and big investors. But the Reserve Bank owns and is purchasing plenty too, and they'll be buying, but they'll only be buying them on the secondary market, i.e. after somebody has bought it, because they don't want to do too much of that supply and demand thing.
That is confusing.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you trying.
Let's put that on the whiteboard of bad ideas.
I suppose yes. No. I don't think so. I think the point here is that what I'm learning is why this is a subject at university and why I give my banker a lot of money. But I certainly got more of an idea now of what that means and why it's exciting when Scott Morrison says we've sold some bonds. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Some promises. I think you've got to have some pretty big cojones to be buying promises from the government.
Well, yeah, and billions of them, billions of dollars worth of promises.
You got to have a lot of faith, yeah?
You do. You got to have faith. But
yes, we're getting sued by George Michael's estate.
Yeah, I was going to say. The thing is, Australia has AAA credit rating, so it's not as though we don't pay back our debts. It's just we pay them back fairly slowly.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm off to read
Keynesian economics.
I'm off to the land of fairy tales.
Fairy tales and promises.
The land of promises. And they bid on promises. Thanks for chatting with me on the Aussie English podcast.
Yes.
With Pete Smisson.
Yeah, it was an absolute pleasure. It was a lot of fun. I hope listeners check that out and enjoy it. And I hope that welcome to all the people that are listening to us from Aussie English.
Yes. Welcome aboard. Welcome. Well, not aboard because we're in a pouch.
Yep, true.
Welcome in. To the cozy pouch. Jake, once our listeners have finished deciding whether or not they can spend that time wisely, what would you like them to do?
Subscribe, rate, review, all of those things would be fantastic. It really helps for people to find our show.
Yes, it does. It does, Jake.
It does.
And I'm going to buy that promise from you.
And I'm going to pay it back with interest.
And if you want to share the love, you can tell your friends to head to thepouchofthepodcast.com where they can choose their favorite podcast player of choice and subscribe that way. Jake Farr-Wharton, it's been a long Friday night.
Yes, it has been a long Friday night, admittedly.
And I have some cold fish chips waiting for me in a warm, cozy house. It is literally, and I'm not kidding, it is literally 7 degrees.
Wow.
And I have been shivering I don't even think I've got knees anymore. I don't even think they serve a purpose. I think I've just chipped them away through the period of the last 4 hours. But that's all right. I'm committed. That's how committed I am. I should be committed. Thank you so much for chatting with me this week, Jake. And I will see you again very soon.
Very soon, I think. Yes, very soon indeed.
Can I buy that promise from you?
You can, and I will pay it back with interest. I've just made that joke twice.
I like the idea of paying back a promise with interest.
Yeah, me too.
I don't feel as cold anymore.
No, it warms the cockles of your knees.
Yeah. Oh, is that where they are?
I found them.
Got him. You can check us out on Spotify, on Applify.
On Bling Blong and Coswidlip.
Yep, they're the best ones.
Also on Tinglepang and Flingwall.
Flingwall, big sponsor of the show.
Big sponsor of the show.
Go and drink their Flombardis.
Flavoured Fringwall.
Absolutely.